In this video, we conclude our discussion on Chapter 11, where last time we went over expansionary fiscal policy. This time we will go over contractionary fiscal policy by going over fiscal restraint, the AD excess, and the policy target of the government, to then conclude with a summary. With all this in mind, beginning with our preliminaries, in terms of fiscal policy, we have identified the three options the federal government has, as well as the cumulative effect of a fiscal policy change, where now we'd like to see how fiscal policy can be used, where in our last video we saw how expansionary fiscal policy can be used when an economy experiences a negative demand shock. Now we'd like to see how fiscal policy can be used when an economy experiences a positive demand shock, where for an economy in a long-run equilibrium that experiences a positive demand shock, we have seen that starting at point A, if the economy is at a long-run equilibrium, it's producing at potential real GDP Y star at the targeted price level P star. Should a positive demand shock occur, there will be an initial increase in aggregate demand going from AD to AD1, in which quantity demanded with respect to real GDP will be Y1, while quantity supplied with respect to real GDP will be at Y star, which means insufficient inventories amass in the product markets of an economy, kicking off a positive multiplier effect in which a secondary increase in aggregate demand occurs due to the multiplier process increasing consumption, in which AD1 goes to AD2, holding the price level fixed, where quantity demanded with respect to real GDP is now going to be at Y2, and quantity supplied is still going to be at Y star. Then there will be an adjustment process after the cumulative effect of the positive demand shock has made its way through the economy, in which the economy adjusts to the short-run equilibrium, point D, in which there's an inflationary gap in this economy, and there's been an increase in the price level of this economy in which there are inflation concerns as a result. Now, so long as this economy is in the short run, that is, prices are sticky, then there will not be self-adjustment, which means the government would want to step in to return the economy back to a long-run equilibrium state, in which it can do so by restraining aggregate demand, which means it would like to pursue contractionary fiscal policy, where the options at its disposal in terms of contractionary fiscal policy include a tax increase, a decrease in government purchases, or a decrease in income transfers. Now, having identified contractionary fiscal policy is needed by the government to return the economy to a long-run equilibrium state, the process that this policy needs to go through is that the economy is in its short-run equilibrium state at point D with the inflationary gap. The initial policy change needs to occur in that there's an initial decline in aggregate demand, where after this initial decline in aggregate demand occurs, it kicks off a negative multiplier effect in which there is a further decline in aggregate demand corresponding to a decrease in consumption due to the multiplier process, after which there is an adjustment period in which the economy adjusts to the long-run equilibrium at point G, in which the economy is back at potential real GDP Y star and at the targeted price level P star. Where, in terms of this cumulative policy change, we see that the government needs to restrain aggregate demand by more than the inflationary gap, in that if the government were to target the cumulative effect of its policy change by the inflationary gap, after the initial change makes its way through the economy and there's that secondary shift in aggregate demand due to the multiplier process decreasing consumption, then the inflationary gap would be closed, but then after adjustment, the economy would adjust to a short-run equilibrium that is an improved one compared to the prior short-run equilibrium, but there would still be an inflationary gap in this economy. So the government needs to target by more than the inflationary gap, where the precise amount is going to be by the AD excess, which in this case in our graph is going to be Y3 minus Y1, in which the AD excess is the amount AD needs to be restrained in order to achieve full employment after price level changes, in that after the initial change of the policy has been realized and the negative multiplier effect has been kicked in, the economy will adjust to a long-run equilibrium state after price level changes, just as the definition would suggest. So then, with the cumulative effect of the policy now found to be by the AD excess, in terms of relating this to the equations that we've derived in prior videos, and letting the cumulative AD effect equal to the AD excess, beginning with government purchases, we've seen that the cumulative effect of a change in government purchases is going to be purchases scaled by the multiplier. Solving through with respect to purchases, this just means dividing through by the multiplier, in which This means that if the government were to pursue contractionary fiscal policy in the form of decreases to government purchases, then that means they would want to do so by the amount of the AD excess divided by the multiplier. And that after the initial change makes its way and the secondary effect through the multiplier process makes its way through the economy, the exact change in aggregate demand would be by the AD excess. Repeating this exercise with respect to taxes, we've seen that the cumulative effect of a tax change would be by the AD excess, letting that equal to the cumulative effect in aggregate demand, is going to be equal to the multiplier scaled by the marginal propensity to consume, scaled by negative taxes, given that taxes are negatively related to aggregate demand. So, solving through with respect to taxes, this means that if the government were to pursue contractionary fiscal policy by increases in taxes, they would have to do so by the amount of 1 divided by the marginal propensity to consume, scaled by the multiplier, all over scaling through the AD excess, such that after the initial change in the tax increase that's made its way through the economy, that is the MPC scaled by taxes, and the multiplier process has kicked in, then that means the cumulative effect that the tax increase would have on the economy would be precisely that of the AD excess. The same could be said with income transfers, given that they're modeled the same as taxes, but being positively related to aggregate demand. And we would arrive at income transfers needing to be by the amount of 1 divided by the MPC scaled by the multiplier, all scaled by the AD excess, where this is going to be the amount that the government needs to decrease income transfers, such that after the initial decrease in income transfers makes its way to the economy, and there's the secondary decrease in consumption due to the multiplier process, then the precise amount that aggregate demand decreases will be by the amount of the AD excess. Where with these policy targets, we see that overall in absolute value, income transfers are identical to taxes, as we've mentioned before. And in terms of restraint, government purchases require less restraint than transfers or taxes, given that they have a direct effect on aggregate demand, while income transfers and taxes have a proportional effect, as we mentioned in our prior video and in our derivation of these equations 2 videos prior. So then in summary, with respect to an economy that's in a short-run equilibrium state from a positive demand shock, the government can intervene with contractionary fiscal policy, where the cumulative effect of the policy change should be by that of the AD excess. And in terms of the 3 options available, government purchases will require the least amount of restraint, given that they directly affect aggregate demand. And in terms of the story that we can tell with respect to our ADAS model, Phillips curve model, and business cycle graphic is, if an economy is initially in a long-run equilibrium state at point A, at potential real GDP, at the targeted price level P star, should a positive demand shock occur, then after the cumulative effect of the positive demand shock has been realized, there will be adjustment to the short-run equilibrium at point B, in which there will be an inflationary gap present and an increase in the price level. Where with a positive demand shock occurring, in terms of our Phillips curve model, this means leftward movement along the short-run Phillips curve going from point A to point B, in which the inflation rate is above pi star, indicating price stability does not hold, and in terms of the unemployment rate, the economy will be below its natural rate of unemployment. And given that a positive demand shock has occurred, in which there's an inflationary gap, in terms of our business cycle graphic, this means the economy has recovered to a peak at point B, where so long as this economy is in the short run, that is, prices are sticky, there will be no long-run self-adjustment, such that the government has incentive to step in with contractionary fiscal policy, where they will proceed with contractionary fiscal policy, where after the cumulative effect of the policy has been realized, the economy will adjust to an equilibrium at point C, which is a long-run equilibrium back at potential real GDP and the target price level P star, where with a negative demand shock occurring due to contractionary fiscal policy, this means rightward movement along the short-run Phillips curve to point C, in which the economy is back at its natural rate of unemployment U star and at an inflation rate pi star that is compatible with price stability. And given that this economy has contracted to a long-run equilibrium state, this means movement from point B to point C at the long-run equilibrium in terms of our business cycle graphic. So with all this in mind, next time we'll pick up by starting our development of monetary policy.